My name is Juliane Camfield. I'm the director of Deutsches Haus at NYU. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the last event in our season. And I'm delighted that we'll be able to present this wonderful literary event to round out this pretty insane last year. We will, of course, be speaking about what you can see from here, was man von hier aus sehen kann, the wonderful novel by Mariana Leky. And we are co-presenting this event together with the Consulate General of Germany in New York. And we have the pleasure and honor of Wolfram von Heynitz, the Deputy Consul General, giving the welcoming remarks after I finish speaking. The book was translated by the amazingly talented translator Tess Lewis, who will also be on the panel, translated into English, I should say, and just published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux in the US. And the moderator for the conversation between Mariana Leky and Tess Lewis will be Rachel Cohen. We are very grateful for all these three literary luminaries joining us today and discussing this absolutely fabulous novel by Mariana Leky. So we are grateful for this constellation, and we are grateful for the fantastic continued collaboration with the German Consulate General. And I want to thank again Wolfram von Heynitz and also Yasemin Pamuk from the Consulate General for the continued friendship and excellent collaborative spirit. I want to thank Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and especially Lauren Roberts, who's been amazing in preparing this event. Thank you so much, Lauren. I also, of course, want to thank my colleagues here at Deutsches Haus at NYU, especially Sarah Girner, Adriana Diaz, and Linda Künzel for their important work backstage, so to speak. And always thanks go to the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for their continued support of our academically inclined events. Last but not least, thank you, dear audience, for joining us. I know everybody is a bit tired from a gazillion Zoom webinars, meetings, and whatnot, so we appreciate you making the time today, especially now that summer has begun, to join us and to learn more about this novel. And I'll shortly talk about this novel, but I want to start with reading the bio information about our three panelists. And I'll start with the author, with Mariana Leky. Mariana Leky was born in Cologne and lives in Berlin. She's the author of the novels The Gentleman's Tailor and First Aid, for which she received the Advancement Prize for Young Artists from the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. What you can see from here won the Comburg Stipendium and the Via Communis Literaturpreis in Germany. And I should mention that this novel has been an absolute bestseller in Germany. I think over 400,000 sold copies, and it has also been translated in, I believe, around 20 languages. And we just learned that it's also being adapted for the screen. So soon we'll have to do an event comparing the screen adaptation with the original novel. Mariana Leky began her career as a bookseller and later studied cultural journalism at the University of Hildesheim. Moving on to Tess Lewis. Tess is a writer and translator from the French and, of course, the German. Her translations include works by Peter Handke, Walter Benjamin, Klaus Merz, Hans Magnus Enzensberger, Christine Anjou, Pascal Bruckner, and Jean-Luc Benosilio. And we just learned that she's just been announced as a Berlin Academy Prize Fellow, an annual prize for a fellowship at the wonderful American Academy in Berlin. And Tess is also one of our co-curators for this year's Festival Neue Literatur, which will hopefully, fingers crossed, take place in mid-November in person this year. And we are so grateful for working with Tess and also Alta Price, the other co-curator, in making this event happen together with all the great partner organizations for Festival Neue Literatur. So mark your calendar, hopefully for mid-November. Last but not least, Rachel Cohen, our moderator, is the author of Austen Years, a memoir in 5 novels, A Chance Meeting, Intertwined Lives of American Writers and Artists, which won the Penn Gerard Fund Award and was a finalist for the Guardian First Book Prize, and Bernard Berenson, Alive in the Picture Trade, which was longlisted for the J.Q. Wingate Literary Prize. Rachel's essays have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Guardian, The London Review of Books, The Believer, and elsewhere. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the MacDowell Colony, and the New York Foundation for the Arts, and teaches in the Creative Writing Program at the University of Chicago. All right, now I'll provide a little synopsis for the people who have not yet read the novel either in German or in English. So here you go, but you should definitely still read the novel even after this event, and you know which publisher to buy it from, Farrar, Straus and Giroux. So here we go. 10-year-old Louisa looks on as the predictable characters of her small world begin acting strangely. Protesting that they are not superstitious, each of the villagers grapples with the buried secrets and deferred decisions that have suddenly become urgent. What if they leave their deepest confessions unspoken, their desires unrealized? Louisa's mother struggles to decide whether to end her marriage. An old family friend, known only as the optician, tries to find the courage to tell Selma he loves her. Only, said Marley's, remains unchanged, still moping around her house and cooking terrible food. But when death finally comes, the circumstances are outside anyone's expectations. Across 3 defining moments in her life, Louisa grapples with irresolvable questions of fate alongside her devoted friends, young and old. A story about the absurdity of life and death, a bittersweet portrait of village life and the wider world that beckons beyond what you can see from here. And this is what the US cover looks like. The German and British edition covers also look wonderful. So, and you see, here's the Okapi, very important protagonist in this novel, is also a thoughtful meditation on the way loss and love shape not just a person, but a community. And on a personal note, I just want to end with saying that, you know, at least for me, the question of community and also the support of literature have saved me during the last year. And I couldn't be more grateful to all the wonderful authors out there who made that possible. Having said that, I want to now hand things over to the German Deputy Consul General in New York, Wolfram von Heynitz. Wolfram, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Dear Mrs. Kempfield, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. Dear Mrs. Lewis, dear Mrs. Cohen, dear Mrs. Gerner, and particularly dear Mariana Leky. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation we're going to have today about a fantastic, remarkable book, What You Can See From Here. I grew up in a small town called Weilburg, which is just on the opposite side of this mountain range, the Westerwald, that features so prominently in the book. On the other side, viewed from Cologne, the town where Mariana Leky was born. One of the first books that made a lasting impression on me while I grew up in this town on the edge of the Westerwald was 100 Days of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Or better to say, it was not the book, it was the style in which he wrote the so-called magical realism. But growing up in this town, I would have never imagined that the magical realism of Marquez could be transferred from the lush rainforests and colorful villages of Colombia to the windy hills and gray-stoned villages of the Westerwald region, just a few miles away from my hometown. Mariana Leky succeeded in doing that with her novel, and I'm particularly happy that we have the occasion today in this time to discuss about her book, because we are living in a time where the borders of reality and fiction are becoming blurry and sometimes maybe need to be redefined when we get used to Zoom meetings, hybrid formats, and when we've seen that even fake news can trigger real events like the storm on the Capitol. But to be fair to Mariana Leky and to her book, what you can see from here is marked by a very warm human view on its characters. And contrary to fictional news that are often distributed by Twitter, it creates a very positive feeling, and therefore it has the potential to influence our real lives in a positive way. So, and I think this is the real power of fiction. And it is also the real power of intercultural dialogues, debates like the one we're having today. With this, I will hand over to Ms. Cohen or Ms. Lewis and wish you a successful discussion and an interesting virtual encounter. So thank you very much, all viewers, for attending this event, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. What lovely introductions to have as we start this conversation. I'm just thrilled to be here with Mariana and Tess, whose work is so fine and so illuminating. And it's just a real chance for me to talk about something with all of you that I love to talk about, which is how books get made, and then how they get remade in the different languages that they migrate into. So we're going to begin today with a brief reading so that you can catch something of the really glorious sound of this book. Mariana will begin briefly in German, and then Tess will take up in English so that we'll get to hear this new, brilliantly new translation just ready in the world. And then we'll have a conversation, the three of us, for about 40 minutes, and then we'll welcome questions from all of you through the Q&A. You can put them into the Q&A, and then we'll be able to see them and read them out and discuss them. So without further ado, I want to welcome Mariana, whose book I just absolutely loved. I just read it in the evenings and wept over it and laughed over it, and it's just a delight to get to hear it in your own voice. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing the prose again in your two voices.
Oh yes, I thank you very much from me too for these kind introductions. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'm a little excited too, because I fear the last time I talked English for more than 15 minutes in a row was when I was an exchange student in Arkansas, and this is really a very long time ago. But I'll do my best. And now I hide behind the German language for some minutes, and I read the beginning. Weide, Weide. Als Selma sagte, sie habe in der Nacht von einem Okapi geträumt, waren wir sicher, dass einer von uns sterben musste, und zwar innerhalb der nächsten 24 Stunden. Das stimmte beinahe. Es waren 29 Stunden. Der Tod trat etwas verspätet ein und das buchstäblich, er kam durch die Tür. Vielleicht verspätete er sich, weil er lange gezögert hatte über den letzten Augenblick hinaus. Selma hatte in ihrem Leben 3-mal von einem Okapi geträumt und jedes Mal war danach jemand gestorben. Deshalb waren wir überzeugt, dass der Traum von einem Okapi und der Tod unbedingt miteinander verbunden waren. Unser Verstand funktioniert so. Er kann innerhalb kürzester Zeit dafür sorgen, dass die einander abwegigsten Dinge fest zusammengehören. Kaffeekannen und Schnürsenkel beispielsweise oder Pfandflaschen und Tannenbäume.
It was an absolute pleasure to translate this book. So thank you, Mariana, for that. Thank you, Deutsches Haus, for hosting us to celebrate this book. And thank you so much, Rachel, for moderating. I will read the passage that Mariana just read for those of you who don't know German and for those of you who do know German to compare it. And if it tempts you, I just want to point out that there is a longer excerpt featured on LitHub daily today. So if we draw you in, you can continue the experience later. So, meadow, meadow. When Selma told us she had dreamed of an okapi the night before, we all knew that one of us was going to die in the next 24 hours. We were almost right. It took 29. Death arrived a bit late, and very literally, he came in through the door. Maybe he was delayed because he had put it off for a long time, even past the last possible moment. Selma had dreamed of an okapi 3 times in her life, and each time someone had then died. That's why we were convinced her dreams of an okapi were directly connected to death. That's how the mind works. It can draw connections between completely unrelated things in an instant. Coffee pots and shoelaces, for example, or deposit bottles and fir trees. The optician had a mind especially adept in this. You could name 2 things that had absolutely nothing to do with each other, and right off the bat, he would explain how they were closely related. And yet it was the optician, of all people, assuring us this latest okapi dream most certainly would not cause anyone's death. That death and Selma's dream were completely and absolutely not connected. But we knew that the optician, like us, believed they were. The optician more than anyone else. My father claimed it was complete and utter nonsense, and that our delusion came from the fact that we allowed too little of the world into our lives. He was always saying, "You've got to let more world in. You've got to let more of the world in." Previously, he would say this decisively and primarily to Selma. Afterwards, he said it only rarely. In Selma's dream, the okapi stood in a meadow near the edge of the forest, in a group of fields and meadows that together are called the Ulhek, the owl forest. People from the Westerwald often call things by a different or shorter name because they like to get any talking over with quickly. The okapi in the dream looked exactly as okapis do in real life, and Selma, too, looked exactly as she did in real life, namely like Rudi Carrell. Surprisingly, we'd never noticed Selma's perfect resemblance to the Dutch television host Rudi Carrell. It took someone from outside to come and point it out to us years later. But then the resemblance hit us with full force. Selma's long, slender body, her posture, her eyes, her nose, her mouth, and hair. From head to toe, Selma resembled Rudi Carrell so perfectly that from then on, in our eyes, he was nothing more than a poor copy of Selma. In the dream, Selma and the okapi stood in the Ulhek without moving. The okapi turned its head to the right, toward the forest. Selma stood a few steps away. As in each of these dreams, she was wearing the very same nightgown she was sleeping in. Sometimes her nightgown was green, sometimes blue or white, but always ankle length and always flowered. Her head lowered, she looked at her toes in the grass. Long and old and crooked, just like in real life. She glanced at the okapi now and then from the corner of her eye, looking up at it from below the way you look at someone you love far more than you're prepared to admit. Neither moved, neither made a sound. Even the wind that always blows across the Ulhek was still. Then Selma raised her head and the okapi turned toward her so that they were looking directly at each other. The okapi gazed at her with eyes that were very gentle, very black, very wet, and very large. It gave Selma a friendly look, as if it wanted to ask her something, as if it were sorry that okapis can't ask any questions, even in dreams. This scene lasted a long time, with the image of Selma and the okapi looking into each other's eyes. Then the image disappeared. Selma woke up and the dream was over, just as some life nearby would soon be over.
Thank you so much. It was beautiful to hear it first in German and then in that wonderful English. And if we were in a real space together, then the people in the audience and I would all applaud, and there would be a moment of kind of the sound of recognition. So here with my voice, I'm representing all the people in the audience and our collective appreciation for that, for that language. We've been talking, the three of us, a little bit in preparation over the last weeks for this conversation, and I'm so looking forward to kind of actualizing what we've been talking about. One of the things that that comes up a lot in, well, there are a couple of things that come right at the beginning in the prose that you both read that are, I think, kind of themes of our planned conversation. One is the little moment where, right in the first sentences, we all knew that what that means. There's such an interesting set of questions around knowledge in this book. Who knows what and how, and what a community knows, what the different characters know. And then there's also the beautiful drawing together, the coffee pots and shoelaces, the deposit bottles and fir trees, these unlike things that can be made together. And it's fitting that it's the optician, who's a wonderful character in this book, who is always able to find a connection between the things, because I take that to be about metaphor in a way, and about the process of writing, and sort of how one finds things that join together among unlike things. So those are two things that I'm thinking about as we talk together. And we wanted to begin just by, I wanted to ask you, Mariana, as every writer wants to ask every other writer, how did you get the voice for this book? Because the voice is wonderful and unusual and pulls you in right away as a reader. And then one wants to know, did it come all at once? Did it take a long time? Did you hear it and not know what to do with it? What was it? How did the voice arrive?
Before I start to actually sit down and write, I walk along literary for years. That's and I think that's one reason I have a dog. I march towards the characters I want to develop, and I walk around them. And in the beginning, they just, they stand there like in a kind of family constellation therapy that got stuck. They stand there silently and look in the world. And but as soon as I really know how they look, and I mean how they appear and how they look into the world, and as soon as they have, by walking and walking and walking, their backstory and the story I want them to have, the story that lies ahead of them, when I give all that to them, when I equip them, the characters, with that, then I have the feeling in return they find their voices all by themselves, which sounds a little weird, but it is that way. They then they move and they start talking as soon as they have their conflict or their path before them. So I don't think I really think about the voice. It comes when I equip them with themselves, so to speak.
What a wonderful answer. That seems so close to many things I've heard different writers say, and yet it has completely its own character. I've never heard anyone formulate it exactly that way. Yeah, that seems... and then a thing that I thought is that it's interesting that also many of these characters hear voices themselves, like in different ways. There are, like, the characters themselves hear voices, so that it becomes this kind of human thing, that the very thing that you are describing of walking and attending and waiting and then hearing is also what the characters themselves do as they try to get hold of their own lives, whether it's the voices of people they know or their inner voices, or they're kind of all listening and going through a sort of similar process. And so it's like the book is populated by all of these writers who are kind of working with their own material. It makes sense that they would then, that they would find their own voices, that would be your experience of listening to them, is that they start talking. So, yeah, that's really...
That you mentioned that, it didn't came to my mind that, of course, the old optician is dealing with voices in his head too, just as I do, but he sadly more in a destructive way, so to say.
Yes, it's a more bitter fight for him, this question of the voices, but right, they are writerly in some way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah, never saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about the voices and about a partial vision, and the voices to me for the optician were conclusions that he made on partial information. So it's what he knows, but it's sort of taking the glass half empty interpretation of it. But in his real life, and his insight into the characters of Selma, whom he's loved for decades, and other members of the family, he's quite insightful emotionally. And that's sort of his better angels, and the voices inside are the worse angels. And you do see that in other characters as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very psychological understanding. I mean, of that one may be generous with other people and very harsh with oneself for the same things. You know, that you would never hold other people to the impossible standards to which you hold yourself or something, and that's kind of plays out for some of these characters too. Tess, I wonder if you want to say a little bit about how you thought about voicing in terms of the translation, and kind of maybe what it's like for you as a translator looking for a tone or a voice that will in some way go with the source book, or you know, how you find, like, are there moments where you think, this is the right kind of language, or and how that happened for this book?
It was easier with this book than with many others, because Mariana has created characters with so many levels and nuance and blind spots, but also insight. So once I had a full idea of the character, then it was easier for me to sort of find words or find a voice that choreograph a little bit verbally dialogue that fit them. And while there are subtle differences and large differences between the various characters' voices, they are definite. They really reflect the characters' personalities. And so, for example, Louisa, who has a role not only as a narrator, but her 10-year-old self, her 22-year-old self, and a 32-year-old self all speak, to the reader. They speak to other characters, and they a little bit speak to each other. So you have several layers of both awareness and knowledge and insight going on with everything that Louisa says. And in order to keep that straight, basically, my strategy was to always read out loud, particularly dialogue, and make sure that it sounded to me as I would imagine that person speaking. So it was a balancing act, but there were definite centers of gravity that I could maneuver around.
So did you read aloud the German or the English or both?
Just the English, actually.
The English. So it was almost like you were inhabiting them or something, like kind of trying out their lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That seems I feel like there's something related in writing fiction, that it's a kind of that there's often a feeling of like letting it perform somehow, whether that's in your mind or when you read it out, or and that this book does have something of a theatrical quality. The scenes are very clear, like I see them in my mind very clearly. I know what the setting is. I kind of know where people are in space in relation to one another. It's always a mystery how a writer accomplishes that, but it feels right that you would be able to kind of read out what they say and feel whether that fits with the characters. And I wonder, like, about choosing words. Like, there's a thing that's lovely throughout the book is this combination of different levels, like things which are very light and funny with things which are darker and more difficult, things which are in the popular culture in one way or another, with things which are you know, about love or about death or about the things that are on all of our minds all the time. And I wonder if maybe each of you in your different registers would say something about how you think about kind of combining, say, Mariana, combining those different levels, and then how that, I know that Tess, you mentioned that that's reflected in certain word choices, and maybe Mariana, did you want to?
When Tess just said that she read out loud the German and the English version, I thought that now I know even more why her translation is so marvelous, because she not only captures the plot, but she captures the sound of the book, and I think this is really hard to translate the sound, and maybe that's because of this reading out loud. Maybe that helped on that. And your question was about different feelings and like humor and tragedy putting together, right? Okay, see that. Okay, so I think that humor, for example, for me, it has two advantages. If a tragic or a terrifying situation is accompanied by humor, it makes, in my opinion, it easier to slip into the tragic situation. Humor is kind of assisting the way into the tragedy, I would say. And on the very other hand, humor underlines tragic in a way. It puts like a spotlight on the tragic situation. And while we laugh, we feel how much we need that laugh right here in our unfunny darkness, so to say. And it is, of course, a trick against kitsch. A trick to avoid kitsch. I try that all the time. Kitsch is seldom associated with humor, so you can hide behind the humor with your hands full of kitsch in a way. Even though I'm not sure what kitsch is. Maybe it's saying stereotype words in bombastic voices. I don't know. But this is the effect humor has for me in writing.
Yeah, wonderful. And Tess, you had written about how how you feel these this sort of combination even in certain words, like in some older vocabulary put together with some newer cultural references, or some like different registers of language that can be part of the humor and of the kind of slippage, really, that Mariana was just speaking of kind of being able to move very deftly in and out of sorrow.
That is an important element of this variable register is an important element of Louise's voice. She's, for much of the book, she's a 10-year-old, but then she's also older, looking back at her 10-year-old self. And that difficulty starts in the very first, the first sentence of the book, in the prologue, or no, not in the prologue, in the first, early in the prologue in any case. And it says, the okapi is an incongruous animal. In German, Mariana used the word abwegig, which is not really a common, it's not a very standard word, and it's very multivalent. It can mean absurd, far-fetched, devious, groundless, unreasonable. It has a whole list of shades of meaning. And for the first draft, I had chosen preposterous, because it does have, the word has the sense of the outrageous. But when in doubt, I go back and look at words etymologically, and preposterous etymologically means, the back comes first. So, it is absurd, but it's not absurd in the sense that an okapi really is, which looks like it's assembled from different parts of animals, and it's inharmonious and so forth. So incongruous also had that ring to me of, a word that, sure, you know what it means, but you're not going to drop it in your next conversation casually like that. So that, weighing each of these words, looking at the various shades of meaning and trying to figure out which one, captures the original meaning, all the original meanings, but also recreates the feeling, the atmosphere in English, is what I did. And one reason I suspect that Louisa speaks this way is, it's a very small village, and she spent much of her time with her grandmother and the optician, both 2 generations older than she. Her parents were more or less absent emotionally or physically. And so she has a little bit of that generation's vocabulary and approach to the world. And then she was a child in school, so she also has the more childish vocabulary. So it was a constant dance with vocabulary and registers to try and recreate the atmosphere.
Yeah. Can I say something to that what Tess just said?
Yes.
Because that's completely right. She's using these rather antique words from the optician and her grandmother, but it's also that I very much like to not use the obvious word. I like to use the word next to the obvious word. And this is because if you, for example, if you let's say big love, if you read the word big love, you may overread big because it's not surprising, because it's expected and narrow in a way. But if I say what would be an English word, maybe extended love, that would be the word next to it, and it would maybe open much more, because it comes to the word love from an other context. So that makes this stumbling, which is hopefully interesting. So this was coming to the things you just explained too.
Yeah, that's nice. And as you were speaking, Tess, I saw the look on Mariana's face that meant, oh, somebody has understood the thing that I did. And it's such a nice feeling when you're a writer and across a distance, unexpectedly, it comes back to you, the thing that you made. So that was just, I was so happy to be present for that moment of mutual comprehension. I think the incongruity also, I mean, it's interesting that the word incongruous becomes the sort of example of this thing, of this translation, because it's very much the same kind of thought of the coffee pots and the shoelaces, or that these things that you don't necessarily, or what you just said, Mariana, about the word next door, that these things which you don't understand to be related, when you find the relation between them, then things open. That's very much and I feel like that's part of the formal inventiveness of this book, is of finding ways to put things together formally that seem like they won't fit, in such a way that then you see, oh, there is, once you put them together, then this will all open. And that's part of what makes the book so moving. Like, I find myself crying, even rereading a scene like for the 3rd time. It's interesting that it's somehow these unexpected juxtapositions are a release in a way for the reader, in a way that seems very interesting. And I think that also has partly to do with the points of view, with the way you're handling points of view. You said, Mariana, that people have asked you, and I too am curious about, Louisa has this complex, she can she speaks in the first person. She's rendering her own experience, and she also knows about scenes for which she wasn't present, or can relate what's happening in the inner lives of some of the other characters. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, those are usually things that we take to be prohibited. You know, you can have a first person, you can have a third person omniscient, you can have a close third person, but you cannot have a first person that's also a third person omniscient. How did you manage that? It feels completely right for the book, and I accept it as a convention of this world. But tell us a little about that.
I'm very happy that it feels good for you in the book, and that you don't feel it's a mistake. Actually, some on Amazon, I saw some critics who wrote, "Oh, there she made a big mistake. Louisa can't know how the optician feels," and how should I put this? The book, it's correspondent to the book's title, which is the same title in English and German, What You Can See From Here. So I wanted to establish a radical subjective position here. It's what one, Louisa in this case, can see from here. So we have her perspective on it. And then I wanted to invent something like so what's the word for allwissender Erzähler, Tess?
An omniscient narrator.
Omniscient narrator, yeah. I wanted to establish something like a subjective, omniscient narrator, like a mixture from this point of view, what I can see from here. I see, Louisa sees all the people and maybe puts something into the characters. She starts maybe working on the characters too, while she lives with them. And at some point, but this is not a big secret to reveal or something astonishing. It is just a little thought. And in the end, when Selma is dying, she says to Louisa, "You have invented the world." And I just wanted to have that standing there, that maybe Louisa has invented that story. It's nothing to talk about or to think about. I just thought this is a twist, like under the carpet or so. But I never read that before, that an objective position is subjective and at the same time. And I just wanted to experiment with that, how far we can go with this until it's problematic. How often we can look into the head of the optician from Louisa's point of view.
In a certain sense, it felt consistent to me. I mean, as consistent as this book is, it's intentionally inconsistent. But death is personified. There's a lovely scene where, after Selma has had her dream and old Farmer Heubel really is ready to go, and he hopes desperately that he's the next. So he imagines death coming and visiting him, taking him by the hand, very politely apologizing for his cold hands. So you have the border between the two worlds are porous. More than one person comes back, you know, maybe imagined, maybe really from the dead. And so you could see it as Louisa looking back from the afterlife or the beyond and retelling the story with this extra knowledge. So I don't think you have to look that far to find explanations for this blending of the subjective and objective point of view, especially with a title like What You Can See From Here. The question is, where are you looking from?
Yeah, right. You're right. Yes.
Yes, I thought about that. There are a few places where there's a gesture toward a retrospect, like you know, that much later this is what would happen, but this would already have happened, or that that allow you to think this is of course this is what Louisa is thinking about all her life, and so from different points of view in her life, she would be able to see different aspects of it and to imagine differently. Which is true, I think, for most of us, that we gather a certain kind of omniscience over time. Like, we have an interaction with somebody, and then only much later do we think, oh, I bet they were worried about this. You know, like, you kind of, you're able to fill in the inner lives of other people as you gain experience yourself, and so you do become a writer of the other lives that yours has intersected with. To me, as I said before, the optician is is just like a writer. He's writing these letters to Selma that he's crossing out all the parts of. He's editing himself, and he's kind of trying to find the things that fit together. And he's also importantly doing some of the key emotional work of the book, or say, like at just the right moments, he knows to say this thing to that one, or to call so and so, or to. And I did want to look at just a couple sentences so that we can actually see the translating. And I wonder if maybe, I think Zara was going to share, there's one of the pairs of sentences where you can see the optician writing his letter and then his possible letters. And maybe we'll share the screen. And I think it might be the third of these possible sentences. I don't know that we'll have time to talk about all of them, but yes, in the what isn't said. So Tess and Mariana, would you take us through this this set of passages or these set of sentences and how you thought about them?
Do you want me to read them, or shall I just talk about, rather explain them, or?
Maybe some combination if you want to mostly talk, but whatever you want to read too.
Yeah, I read 3 sentences.
Yeah.
It says, liebe Selma, es gibt da etwas, das ich dir schon seit Jahren. Liebe Selma, es ist nach all den Jahren unserer Freundschaft bestimmt falsch, komisch, seltsam, bemerkenswert, unerwartet, überraschend, falsch. Liebe Selma, anlässlich der Hochzeit von Inge und Dieter möchte ich dir endlich einmal. Liebe Selma, du wirst lachen, aber. So what, Tess, do you want to read them in English before we talk about it?
Okay. Dear Selma, there's something I've wanted to say for years. Dear Selma, after so many years of friendship, it's surely a mistake. Odd, strange, remarkable, unexpected, surprising. A mistake. Dear Selma, on the occasion of Inge and Dieter's wedding, I'd like to finally, dear Selma, you're going to laugh, but this is just another case where it helps to read out loud, so that you can, so that I could be sure that this is something that I could imagine hearing or reading from the optician.
Yeah, right. This is the old optician trying to reveal his old love to old Selma, and he needs 22 years for this. And within these 22 years, he writes letters. He wants to reveal love through writing, and in these letters, they all break up. No letter is complete. There's always just 1 or 2 sentences. Then he stops because his hyperactive voices tell him that this is all stupid and Selma will never love him, and it's just ridiculous to send those letters. And but this is, since he writes these letters every day and mentions something from their ordinary life, this is, in the end, it's kind of a chronic of the village, because he's writing so much about their life together, which they have, Selma and him. And this tragedy of always trying again and again. I wanted to, I wanted to show that love never ends, but letters do, in a way.
And these letters, these piles and piles of letters that he has, without revealing too much, they end up being read. And you see, it also is a chronicle of the life of the village. So he says here, on the occasion of Inge and Dieter's wedding, I'd like to finally. And then later there's one, since Inge and Dieter are getting divorced. And so you get a lovely recap when these letters are finally opened.
And when you were writing them, Mariana, how did you decide where to cut them off?
That's interesting. That was the sound, actually. It was like a, oh, now I don't know the right word. Maybe it's wrong, but when I read this sentence that just stopped, it had for me, excuse me, I really don't know if that's the right word, like in a hip hop song, you know. I'm not at all firm with that, but it has a certain rhythm to it, and I stopped either when it seems from the sound good to stop here, or when the optician was very close to saying the thing he wanted to say, and then you cut it off. So these are the two options to cut him off. Anytime it's almost out, and then no, stop here, you can't do that, says his mind.
Yeah. And in translating, Tess, how did you think about the struck through things, like all the words that are, I mean, because that's in a way like the work of a translator, like when you listed out all the possibilities for the word that first was preposterous, it sounded like a thesaurus, you know, like it could be this.
Well, that was, you know, I was trying to pay attention both to following the thought process that the optician is obviously going through when he's going from false to, you know, odd, to strange, to remarkable, to unexpected. And then, you know, it's sort of it's not exactly a ramping up of tension, but you can see him thinking, you know, he goes from being dismissive to anticipatory. So I tried to echo the rhythm of the original sequence of words, but then also catch the arc of the emotions that he was going through in writing this. And there's a very funny section, I think it's funny, when you've got a long series of these letters, and then one of them is just, "Dear Selma," and then, damn it, it's crossed out.
That's great. That's great. Zara, maybe you'll bring us back to our larger selves, because soon we're going to switch to hearing from the audience, and I see many questions are accumulating in the Q&A, which show that there are people with us who have read the book attentively, so we will want to get to their questions too. But I think something that I was struck by that maybe draws together some of the things that have been said in thinking about that what you said, Mariana, which is so helpful to me thinking about writing about a sort of radical subjective, like a radical point of view in which a person is a knower of other people's minds. I think that seems like it's a kind of principle of the book, which in a way is part of what aligns it with magical realism as the introductory remarks kind of brought out. And I think those letters are a place, the way that those letters, the optician's letters, arrive toward the end, and they're like, as you both said, another chronicle of the life of the village, so that then you have this sort of sense of like, actually many people have been keeping track of all of these people and their lives and what the meaning of it is. And it doesn't really belong to any one person. And their different languages have been migrating into one another's language, so that Louisa, as you both said, has picked up a vocabulary from the optician and from Selma and from other people. And then she herself is writing these letters to the character Frederick, and those letters do get written and sent. And so then that version of the story makes its way to Japan, where that character is, and those letters also go on for a very long time. And then Frederick kind of gains a whole sense of the village. The village becomes a living place to him too through this communication, and then he's able to take a part in the village life because he's read the village life. So there's this way in which these stories sort of leave the village and return to the village and go under the surface and come back out in the different characters. And all of that, I think, is necessary to render that radical subjective. Like it couldn't only be true of Louisa that she's able to understand and inhabit the other people. Everybody must have that capacity. And then it becomes possible to live this other kind of village life where a lot is known. And in rereading, there was a moment where Frederick writes to Louisa and the postal woman delivers the letter. And she's already read it, of course, because the markings are dark enough that it shows through the transparent envelope. So she arrives and hands the letter, but then tells exactly what's in the letter and there's no need for Louisa to read it herself because it's already known to the woman who works in the post office. And that's really the functioning. That's the way this village works, and it's a sort of version of human life and communication that's really. It's very powerful. It's principled and complex, and so I found it so interesting how that thought you had about how it could what the point of view could be then ramifies through the whole village and all the characters in the village, and it's really helpful to me as a writer to sort of listen to this part of the conversation between the two of you.
It's interesting I thought exactly that, but I couldn't have said it as nice as you just said it now. This subjectiveness is not one person, it's like an orchestra. Everybody writes the story, every character in its own way writes the story or the chronic of this village. Yeah. But I interrupted you, sorry.
And ironically, the person whose view of others is most limited is the one psychiatrist in the book. He can't see other people. From his own sort of interests and ideas, he can't sort of see beyond those.
Yeah.
Though I feel that you also do get that the psychiatrist actually had more insight than one might have thought. So that there's also, even that person is redeemed in a way, or has their own perceptions. But right, everybody must add. And nobody is completely excluded from the universe of understanding. So that's that's really great. Yeah, I'm very interested in any writer. Tess knows because I have been writing about Jane Austen, which is one of the ways we first encountered each other. Any writer who's sort of willing to let their characters possibly just take over the narrative and run with it, and kind of how you can work with a character to such a point that then but then have the courage to let them write. And Austen does that often by letting her characters write letters, because then they become the writer, and they sort of they take the book for a little while, and it's a risk. Is the book going to be given back to the author at the end of the character's letter? You don't know, but it's a risk worth taking. I want to turn to some of the questions here, which range from the practical to the theoretical, and there are many. But a couple of people were hoping to know about the upcoming film adaptation, and a couple of people asked Mariana if you would be involved in that. So maybe you would answer that.
Yes, I'm not involved on purpose. I was asked if I want to assist in writing or share my ideas, and I didn't want to do that because a former book of mine should have been adapted for a movie too, and there I was sent to kind of a writer's camp to learn how to write a screenplay, and that was terrible. And I felt that I just couldn't do that because I wrote the book and I wrote a prose for a meaning. I couldn't just turn the prose into something else. I was not a professional screenwriter, and so that didn't work. And this experience on my back, I thought it's another piece of art. There will be so many changes, that maybe somebody from outside the book who hasn't written the book should do that. And now we found Aaron Lehmann, who is a very, very good director and screenplay writer. And sometimes we talk, and I think this is enough. We have very effective talks when he says, can you explain this character a little more to me? Or, I can't see Frederick, he's so mysterious. Can you say something from his background? Then I do that. I kind of equip him with information I had in my mind. And this is enough, I think. And I have full trust that he will do a very good job there.
Thank you. And Tess, somebody had a question for you. They wanted to know, how is your translation process? Do you read the book in full first to figure out the voice and rhythm, or do you start translating almost immediately?
It depends on deadlines more than anything. In this case, I did read the book because very carefully, actually, because I wrote a report on it for the publisher. When they were considering whether they wanted to acquire it or not. The editor does not speak English. And so I did. And I actually even got the German audiobook, which is beautifully narrated. So it was a mixture of reading it and then listening to it. But sometimes I don't have time to, and I've occasionally regretted not reading a whole book, where I find the beginning is good and then I get halfway through and I just think, oh, when will this ever end? Not often, but so I strive to read the book first, but it's not always possible. As for process, I will just start and do a draft and worry about catching the voices later. So I try to get a rough draft of about a third or a quarter of the book, and then I go back to the beginning because I have a better idea of what I want it to sound like. Again, it's a question of deadlines and how much time I have, but that is one of the most efficient ways that I find of working.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like you get it going and then go back. Linda Kunzel, Mariana wonders if you've read the English translations or those from other languages, and if so, do you find them insightful for your own writing process?
I wish I could read more of the translations, but I was only able to read the English one. My French is very, very poor, and so I could read the English version, and I'm very happy that I could. I learned, it's funny when you read your own book in another language, you see the structure shining through, but just because you know the structure. And because the book is so long, I wrote it in 2017, so it was a long time ago, and now it came back to me in this English version. And so, yes, this is the main thing I thought. As I said, I was very glad that the sound was still there, the sound that was so familiar to me and so important to me, but also how the story is built. And then I said, oh, and now Frederick comes into the story. Now that's interesting, as if I wouldn't know, but I could see through I saw how do you say, the skeleton of the story. I don't know why that happened when I read it in another language. Maybe because this language is not, it's not my language. So I don't know if that's the reason, but I could see through that in a way. And that was very, very interesting for me.
Yeah, that's nice. That's almost like seeing the characters like an unexpected visitor, like an old friend coming into the room, and you think, but here's Frederick. Like I haven't seen him in so long, and here he is. Yeah,
It's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great. Now, we have 3 or 4 questions that are about sight and seeing, about appearing and disappearing, and what you can see, and the optician. So I'm going to group all of those questions and let you both just share your reflections. So the first was a question. The person says, questions related to seeing and sight seem to be at the center of your intriguing novel, as the title makes quite clear. Could you elaborate about that? And then another person says, if Mariana, if you could share your thoughts about the sentence that the optician keeps trying to understand, the sentence regarding the relationship between looking and disappearing or not disappearing. Mm. And then somebody asks, why didn't the optician have a name until almost the end of the book? Why is it always the optician? I think all of those questions in a way are about what you can see from here, what appears, what disappears, and the fact that it's an optician, obviously someone who's responsible for the sight of other people and who's experimenting with his different devices for seeing all the way through. Maybe there's some things to say in that neighborhood.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's of course the title of the book, which is the motto of the book in a way too. And we have not only the optician who is professionally concerned about seeing, and but we have in the very beginning we have two kids, Luisa, she's 10 years old, and her best friend Martin, and they drive to they have to go by train to their school, which is far away. And in the train, they have a special game. They know the way to the school very, very well, and so one closes it's her eyes, and the other one sees outside the window and tells what he sees, and the other one, who has her eyes closed, corrects him. And no, I told the story wrong, but it's almost like that. Somebody closes the eyes and tells the one who sees what he can see. So this is right. I'm sorry. It's not that complicated as I made it sound right now. So this is about seeing and not seeing, and a main reason, or the main thing in seeing that interested me was that these people in these villages, they see each other every day, and you have certain prejudice or opinions about the people you see all the time. You know, oh, there's the optician, he's in love with Selma. You know everything. You can anticipate what he will say, and there's no chance to. There's the danger that there is no chance to develop if you know a person too well, and if you see him every day, like Selma and the optician. And now Monk Fredericks comes from Japan, and they see each other very shortly, and then they see each other for a long time, not and only write those letters. And that was one reason that I put the story in the 1980s, because I didn't want them to have email or or Zoom or something. I want them not to see each other and just write letters. And then I felt that even if that's paradox, that they could see each other much better when there were 90,000 kilometers between them, as when they stand right next to each other, nose to nose, like the village people. So this way of seeing somebody by not seeing him, that was what interested me in the seeing department too, very much. And now I forgot the next question.
Oh no, that's terrific. That's a wonderful. And there was only one other part, which is, why does the optician get his name only at the end?
Yes. The optician at the end, right? I wanted to. For me, the optician is. I like him very much, and he's. I think he's a very fine guy, and I wanted to. It sounds funny now. I never thought about it again. When I structured the novel, I wanted him to be like the prince in a fairy tale. The prince in a fairy tale never has a name. It's always the prince and the princess and the prince. And he doesn't have to have a name because he's the prince. Everybody knows. And everybody in the village knows he's the optician. And so this was the first one, that he's the prince in this story. And I have to admit, the other reason was that I really wanted to have that joke in the end when he says his name and nobody recognized him. This is actually, all this thing is just for stupid.
But it's a great joke because it's exactly the thing. He calls Frederick and he announces his name, and Frederick says, "Who?" And and then he says, "The optician," and Frederick says, "Oh, well, of course, the optician." But I think that's, and it's a way of showing how much Frederick does live in the village, even though he's 90,000 kilometers away, because to him too, this person is the optician, as he is to all the people in the village. And that you actually also answered another question that's in our Q&A about somebody was interested in fairy tales and the influence of Grimm's fairy tales and other fairy tales on your book. And so that was already, you gave one nice answer for that, of sort of thinking about the role of the prince. And I like the idea of the optician as the prince in this story. Yeah. That I was also thinking as you were talking about this odd year that we're all, I hope, coming out of, where we also have these odd combinations of distance and intimacy, like what you were saying, that, you know, the idea of these two people in a train and one is looking and the other is reporting, and then people at a great distance writing letters to each other, possibly seeing each other better than they might be able to close by. And all of us I'm looking at you two in your boxes, and you're so far, and I've never shaken either of your hands. And at the same time, I'm in rooms in your house as I might only be if I really knew you quite well. And somebody in the Q&A has asked, they said, I always find it fascinating to see people's bookshelves, you know, and to wonder what's on them. And I'm, you know, when I go into somebody's house, the first thing I want to do is go and look at all the books that are on their bookshelves. But I feel that's a very intimate act. Like, I always ask if it's all right if I go snooping around to see what they've read. But here we all have our sort of intimate inner lives kind of on display in our... So along the lines of that, this person has wondered, you know, what are books that maybe particularly influence you, or are there books on your shelves that are very significant to you? And another person has asked, what are both of your upcoming projects? What are you working on next? And your bookshelves might have either of those things. They might have your history or your ambitions or your, you know, your practical projects. So maybe if you could say something about, they may not be literally on the bookshelves behind you, but books of the past and the future, books that influence you, books that you hope to work on or write.
Shall I start, or Tessie?
Go ahead.
A book that influenced me in the last years was a writer. It was Elizabeth Strauss. She wrote a book called, what was the English title? Olive
Kittredge.
Kittredge, right? That's the title. And I like that extremely much. It takes place in a small village too, and the woman she's talking about is like, she's a very grumpy person, and she has a lot of like an inner wilderness inside her, and she's not very nice to her husband and not to her son too. But she, in several occasions, she keeps saving or rescuing other people in that village. So she's not very kind to the closest person, but you love her because she's so good to other persons who are a little bit more I like that. I like the humor very much, and I admire that, actually. And the funny thing is that when I wrote this book, I read a book of an American psychotherapist called Stephen Hayes. And Stephen Hayes writes about how our minds function. And he said, how did he say that? He talks about how chattery these annoying minds of ours are. And he says, take two things that have two objects that have absolutely nothing in common with each other. And I promise you, in about 10 minutes, your chatty mind will find something that connects them. And this is really astonishing because it works. I tried it several nights, and everything can belong together. Netflix and, I don't know, forks. So you find a solution after a while. And that is when I read this and I thought, this is such a great game for my optician. And from that, all the other things, the okapi came, because it has nothing to do with itself in a way. And so from that book, which is not a, it's not non-fictional, but it had a great influence on this optician guy, because I thought with such a mind the optician has, that would be a great play for him. And now I try to avoid answering the question to upcoming projects, because still I'm still walking. I have nothing to present yet. It's in this long walking the dog for felt 100 years, and then I will hopefully have another idea.
That's great. Yeah, it is. It's such a long process where you're wandering in the dark, and I think it's only moderately comforting to have gone through it before. Like, even though you've written several books and each one has eventually come, there's still a feeling that it might never come, that you're just going and going and going. It's such an act of faith to keep walking. Yeah.
And as a writer, you always start from the complete beginning. There's nothing you can take from your old book and say, now I wrote that, I can take it into my new.
Right.
It's complete, fresh start all the time. Yeah, but I don't want to complain.
Yeah, that's it. What about for a translator? Influences or next things?
Well, the beauty of translating is that it's never really a fresh start. Our fresh start comes from the end of the author's process. So we don't have the paralyzing blank page. We have different kinds of paralysis, but just not that one. The question about influences ties in with my process. One of the things I do when I'm working on a book is I'll think of books in English that have a similar sound or approach or voice. And I guess the most closely related books for this one were several by Penelope Fitzgerald, who is just marvelous in her insight into a very forgiving insight into flawed people, and how family members and close friends damage each other, but also rescue each other. And particularly I'm blanking on the one about the Shakespearean acting school. There's a child actor, and she inhabits that character so fully. And actually in Offshore as well, where about a single mother and her two daughters on a barge on the Thames. They're living and the boat is sinking and life is falling apart. But seen from the children's eyes, the world it's magical and mysterious and always new. Another book was Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping. The way, you've got these batty old aunts who are nonetheless just completely compelling people. And finally, Persuasion. And that's what, by Jane Austen, which is what led me to ask if you could moderate the way, as you mentioned, Jane Austen lets the narrative, she directs it, but also gives it the reins on occasion, and in Persuasion, the way people misread each other when they're close and only understand each other, after they're apart, and near misses, and romantic tragedies, and also the undertone of death and what it can mean and how do we grieve. So those were the books that were particularly influenced my thinking about this one. As for next projects, I'm working on a book called Annette by a German writer, Anne Weber, who also writes in French. So this one it's about a real life, it's a verse reimagining of a woman, Anne Beaumanoir, who was recognized as one of the righteous by Yad Vashem, who fought in the French resistance and then for the Algerian Liberation Front. And I just did a whole conference with her earlier this week, which meant I had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a Zoom call. It was worth it though. In any case, she wrote the German version, and because she's lived in France for decades, she also did the French version, but it's a rewriting more than it is a translation. So I'm trying to triangulate between the three languages and create something that sounds consistent and coherent and catches the spirit of both texts. So that's the next project.
That sounds wonderful and also very difficult, or very challenging anyway. Yeah, every book presents its new challenges, and I love the way you talked about reading as research for voices, because I do that too for trying to find the tone for the original book. Is I read, I think so-and-so did something that's kind of, I want a sound, it needs more jaggedness, how do I, that kind of thing. So just a couple more things, because unfortunately we have to close. Somebody in the Q&A is very hopeful of finding out where the name Selma came from. It sounded Arabic to that person, and they wondered, is it a German name? Where is that name from?
Ah, that's funny. That's Arabic, she said.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Selma, I know it from my, now I have to count, my great-great-grandmother, whom I, of course, never met. Her name was Selma. And this is why I have chosen that name, because I thought it was very it had a very good sound, and it came from me from very, very, very far away. And I know my research had said that it comes from like Riga zum Beispiel, Lettland, something like that. This is where my family comes from too. So I always put the name in this kind of country.
Actually, Mariana, you're going to love this. I just Googled it, because that's what I do as a translator. Selma is a feminine name of ambiguous origin. The name may also have Celtic origins, in which case it means beautiful view.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot that. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. This is funny, because I read that, I just forgot that, but I heard that when I had written the book already, and I thought now we have the what you can see from the explanation. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, that's so nice. I think about that, like Austen has a book, Emma, and Emma means whole, like a completeness or a whole. And whether or not Austen knew that consciously, it plays so beautifully through the book that it must have been part of the understanding. There are names like that are just the right name, and then they do the things they're meant to do. So in closing, I want to read a comment from Maria Simon, who says, this reading experience has been a gift for me. So much generosity inspires me to consider the characters in my life with more consideration and humor. And then she quotes you, Elspeth smiles. Her bound-up truth had been massive and was very heavy. It still was, but it did her good to see that the optician could carry it so lightly. And then she says, this village and novel did me good. Thank you both. So I thought that was a lovely kind of response to all the things that we've been saying here together. And I want to echo what she said, that it was a real gift to me also to read this book and to get to speak with both of you about the kind of a very deep and complex process by which you made the original book and then made it again for us in English. I think it's a book that many people will read and return to. I know many hundreds of thousands of people have read it around the world, but it is really a very nice thing that we have it in this beautiful English form. For those of us who don't read it in the other languages, it's already in. So I just want to thank both of you so much for the work and the generosity. And I believe Zara is rejoining us to close up our event.
Yeah, thank you. Thank all of you. I'm like sitting here in my invisibility, just smiling from ear to ear. It was so much fun listening to you, kind of getting to know this world better after reading the book and loving the book. And I really highly recommend those of the audience members who haven't read it to please buy it, support your independent bookstore, and go and get this book because it's just so beautiful. And it was really wonderful delving into these questions of positionality and subjectivity and this chorus and who gets to tell a story. And then also what I always love so much, the nitty-gritty of the translation process and just this kind of rethinking, telling this story through a trusted individual. And so Mariana, thank you for writing this novel. Tess, thank you for your wonderful translation. And Rachel, thank you for this wonderful conversation. Like I was just nodding because there is something so distant, but somehow there was such an intimacy to this conversation. And so I'm really grateful for that. So please buy the book. Thank you, FSG, for putting it out. Thank you, Lauren, for bringing this event to our attention. And thank you, of course, to our wonderful partners at the Consulate, particularly Yasemin Pamuk and Wolfram von Heynitz. And last but not least, the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for their support of our programming. So have a great afternoon and evening. And we hope to see you guys soon, hopefully in person.
Yes, that's right. I very much look forward to an actual meeting and a handshake. And yeah, you can sign my book for me.
Yes, I would love that. And thank you very much. That was such a great conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, a real pleasure.
Thank you.